The provocation, the message arrived suddenly like a thunderclap, breaking the silence of the vast quiet galaxy. Earth's government had not been expecting it for months. There had been peace talks with the various alien species of the galaxy. But this message was different. It was from the Vorar, an alien race, known for their brutal strength and advanced technology. They had no interest in peace, no interest in negotiations. The message, in its cold, mechanical tone, demanded Earth's immediate surrender. The VOR leader spoke with pride, as though their victory was already decided. Your planet is weak, the message declared. Surrender now, and save yourselves from total annihilation. You are no match for us. You are nothing but a minor obstacle in the path of our conquest. Humanity had been through many challenges, but nothing like this. It wasn't the first time Earth had been threatened, but the VOR were different. They had no desire for resources or land. They only sought to wipe out any species that didn't bend to their will. Earth, with its rich history of survival, had always found a way to fight back. But this time felt different. This was not a war of chance. It was a war of choice. The leaders of Earth's council gathered immediately. For hours they debated what to do. The generals were certain that Earth's military could repel an invasion. But there were those in the council who wanted to negotiate. Why fight? Why not listen? They argued. We can avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Perhaps we can offer them something they might be willing to negotiate. But General Sarah Hayes, the most experienced military leader Earth had ever seen, was not so easily swayed. She had seen the destruction the fur could bring. She had seen firsthand what happened to civilizations that tried to reason with such a race. We cannot trust them, she said firmly. If we show weakness, they will destroy us. They do not negotiate, they conquer. Have stood before the council, her words sharp and unwithering. The time for talks is over. The Veether have made their choice, and now we will make ours. Earth will not bow down. We will fight. We will survive. The room went silent as the council members absorbed her words. Earth had a choice to make, and there was no turning back now. As the council debated further, General Hayes moved swiftly behind closed doors. She knew Earth could not win this war with conventional weapons. The Ver were too advanced, their ships too powerful. But there was something the humans had that the 43 did not understand: the element of surprise. And most importantly, the willingness to fight no matter the odds. Prepare the old fleet, Hayes ordered her officers. We don't need the latest technology. We need the tools of war from our past, tools that the Ver will never expect. The officers looked confused at first. Earth's military was filled with cutting-edge technology, ships that could outgun most galactic fleets, weapons that could shatter worlds. Why would they go back to old weapons? But Hayes was unshaken. We are not fighting a war of weapons. We are fighting a war of will. The VOR think we are weak because we use outdated technology. Let them think that. Let them underestimate us. She turned to the room, her eyes fierce. It will be their greatest mistake. While the political leaders debated their response to the message, Hayes and her officers began secretly pulling Earth's most ancient and powerful warships out of storage. These ships were relics from the early days of humanity's space exploration. They were old, rusted in places, but they were battle-tested and reliable. Their weapons, while simple, were powerful, designed to take on the toughest opponents in the galaxy. On Earth, a sense of urgency took hold. People prepared for the worst. The threat was real. VOR had already begun their journey, their massive warships looming in the sky. Earth had days at most to prepare for the coming battle. Panic set in, but so did resolve. People knew the truth. If they wanted to survive, they had no choice but to fight. The Vor's next message came just a few hours later, more arrogant than before. This is your final warning. The voice boomed. Surrender now, or your planet will become nothing more than space debris. We will erase your civilization from the stars. The arrogance in the tone was unmistakable. The Veether believed that their victory was certain. But Earth had a secret. They had fought before, and they had survived. As the alien fleet approached, humanity began to prepare for war. But it wasn't the kind of war the aliens expected. The Ver, with their advanced technology and overwhelming force, would never believe that the humans, using old, seemingly outdated weapons, could stand a chance. But General Hayes knew the truth. The VOR had made their first mistake by underestimating humanity, and that mistake would cost them everything. The war was about to begin, and Earth, with all its history of defiance, would be ready. The old fleet awakens. The silence of Earth's military base was broken by the hum of engines long fought, forgotten inside a massive underground hangar. The ancient warships, dormant for decades, began to awaken. These ships had been a part of Earth's history, relics of wars fought, and one now they were being called back to service in a time when the world seemed unprepared for the threat that bloomed on the horizon. General Sarah Hayes stood at the command center, overseeing the operation. Her fingers lightly tapped on the control panel. As she watched the large rusted ships power up, the air was thick with tension for the crew that would man these ships. This was a return to the past, a time when Earth's military was young, and its weapons were more simple. The idea that such ships would be used to defend Earth from the might of the Veether seemed almost laughable. The VOR had no idea what was coming to them. Humanity's outdated fleet was a joke, an easy victory. But that was where they were wrong. General Hayes had studied the 4th AR's tactics. They relied on overwhelming force, brute strength, and technological superiority. What they didn't understand was the true power of human ingenuity, the ability to adapt, improvise, and fight in ways no enemy could predict. Captain Roberts, ready the fleet, Hayes ordered, as she paced the command center. We need every ship in the air. And we need them now. We don't have the luxury of time. Roberts, a seasoned veteran with decades of experience, nodded. Grim lie, General, preparing to launch in 15 minutes. The old fleet was made up of ships that Earth had built in its earliest days of space exploration, before the rapid advancements in technology took place. These ships weren't the sleek high-tech marvels humanity had come to depend on. No, these were bulky steel-plated behemoths, their weapons simple yet effective. The Veether would never suspect that they could be just as deadly as the newest, most advanced warships in the galaxy. At the same time, humanity civilians began to hear whispers of the impending conflict. The news spread quickly. Earth was going to war with an enemy that had no mercy, no compassion. It was a war for they expected to win easily. After all, they were the most advanced species in the galaxy. They had technology far beyond anything Earth had ever known. Yet, in their arrogance, they underestimated the humans. They couldn't comprehend that a race known for its resilience and creativity would not simply lay down and die. While the military worked tirelessly to prepare the people of Earth, did what they did best. They united. The country's population was spread across continents, but the looming threat of annihilation brought them together. Families huddled together in shelters, businesses close, and everyone turned their focus on what mattered most: survival. Back in the command center, General Hayes received the first intelligence report from the Ver fleet. The alien ships were massive, stretching across the sky like dark shadows. It was clear that they intended to bombard Earth into submission, beginning with the major cities. There would be no negotiation, no mercy. The VOR were here to take everything. They think they can break us, General Hayes muttered under her breath, staring at the incoming data. They will regret that. The preparations were almost complete. The old fleet, now fully operational, had been equipped with modern ammunition. Though their designs were outdated, the ships had been refitted to make them as formidable as possible. Even so, the VOR fleet had far superior firepower. Their ships were equipped with plasma weapons that could decimate entire cities with a single blast. The humans had no such advantage, yet General Hayes wasn't worried. She knew the power of surprise and strategy. The old ships may have lacked in speed or advanced weaponry, but they had something the VOR didn't: the ability to blend into the shadows of space and strike from unexpected angles. We won't meet them head-on, Hayes said decisively. We'll lure them in, bait them, and when they least expect it, we'll hit them with everything we have. As the fleet prepared for launch, Hayes felt a weight settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just a battle to save Earth. It was a fight to prove that humanity had the strength, the will, and the intelligence to survive no matter the odds. The old fleet began to lift off from the surface of Earth slowly, but surely. The ships moved like ancient giants, clumsy and slow, but each one carrying the weight of history. The crews aboard these ships were well aware of the risks they were taking. The VOR would not go easy on them. Every human aboard those ships knew that death could come at any moment. The Veether, confident in their superiority, continued their journey toward Earth. They didn't know the humans had prepared. They didn't know that the very ships they thought were useless would be the key to humanity's survival. General Hayes stood at the helm of the command center as the fleet disappeared into space. The battle for Earth had begun. The Veether thought they knew what they were dealing with, but they had no idea what humanity was capable of. It wasn't just the ships that made Earth dangerous. It was the people, their ability to adapt to surprise and to fight with everything they had. And now, as the old fleet sailed into the dark reaches of space, the Veether were about to learn that underestimating humanity was the biggest mistake they could make. The first strike, the vast expanse of space, was silent as Earth's fleet Manu-Ed into position. General Hayes stood at the front of the command center, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The old ships, though slower than modern warships, had a cunning that could not be measured in speed alone. They were ready. Earth was ready. Hayes' fingers hovered over the comms panel as she sent the final command. All ships prepare to engage. Our time has come. There was a collective stillness in the room, as though everyone was holding their breath, knowing that this would be the beginning of a battle for Earth's future. Every crew member aboard those ancient ships knew that this would not be a quick fight. The Vor's firepower would be overwhelming, and their advanced tactics would be difficult to counter, but humanity had one thing they didn't: the will to fight for their home. A few hours earlier, the Vora fleet had entered Earth's system. Massive dark ships were visible even from the farthest reaches of space. They glided toward the planet like vultures circling their prey. The Vor's confidence was palpable. They had underestimated humanity's ability to defend itself. They thought they could wipe the human race off the map with a single strike. But they were wrong. The first strike came from an unexpected direction, out of the darkness of space. Earth's oldest warship, the Excalibur, broke through the Vor's line of sight. It was a relic from the past, a hulking behemoth, but it was the first to fire. The sound of ancient weapons powering up filled the ship's corridors as the crew braced themselves. This was their moment. The VOR had assumed that their advanced sensors would easily detect Earth's fleet. They had no idea that the humans had installed retrofitted stealth technology into their ships. The Excalibur's weapons flared to life, and a burst of missile fire erupted from its main cannon. The missiles, old and unassuming, were anything but obsolete. They carried warheads that packed enough punch to break through even the 43 shields. The first explosion sent shock waves through space. A brilliant flash that lit up the Void Aor cruiser, caught off guard, crumbled under the attack. The crew aboard Earth's ship cheered, knowing that they had taken the first step toward victory. But they also knew this was just the beginning. The Vorar would retaliate quickly, and they had far superior weaponry. General, incoming Ver fire. The communications officer shouted. The first wave of attacks came in a barrage: plasma cannons, energy beams, and missiles. Earth's fleet had no time to celebrate. The battle was truly underway. On the bridge of the Excalibur, Captain Roberts gripped the command chair, his knuckles white with tension. Return fire, he barked, his voice calm but firm. The ship shuddered as its weapon systems powered up, and soon another volley of missiles surged toward the 43 fleet. The battle had only just begun, but the humans were already proving that they were far from easy targets. In the depths of the Vorar flagship, High Commander Exalin watched the destruction unfolding on his ship's monitor. He had expected the humans to crumble under the might of his fleet, but this was something he hadn't anticipated. The Excal strike had been devastating, and now Earth's fleet was beginning to move in synchronized formation. They're fighting back, Zalen muttered, narrowing his eyes. We underestimated them. Their ships, they're not as weak as we thought. The humans had caught the Veether off guard, and now they were retaliating with everything they had. The Veether flagship launched its own assault, and within seconds, a massive plasma beam erupted from its central cannon, streaking toward Earth's fleet. The Excalibur shook violently as it took a direct hit, its shields buckling under the intensity of the blast. Damage report, Captain Roberts shouted. His voice never wavered even in the face of such chaos. Shields at 60%, Captain. We've taken significant damage to our starboard side. The damage control officer reported. But we can still fight, then. We will, Roberts replied, light a determined smile crossing his face. We fight for Earth. The old ships were taking hits, but they kept pushing forward. The Ver were powerful, but their arrogance had blinded them. They hadn't expected the humans to fight with such ferocity. They had underestimated the strength of a species fighting for its survival. As the battle raged on, General Hayes watched from the command center, her hands gripping the edges of the tactical map. The first strike had been successful, but the real test was still ahead. The Ver were relentless, and Earth's fleet was outnumbered. Yet Hayes felt a spark of hope. The old fleet might not have been the fastest or the most advanced, but it had heart, and that heart was something the VOR could never understand. We've made our mark, but this isn't over, General Hayes said, her voice steady. We fight until the last ship is standing. We fight until Earth is as safe across the battlefield. The ancient ships fired once more, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space. The Veether had come to conquer, But they had no idea what they were up against. This wasn't just a battle for Earth. It was a battle for humanity's place in the stars. The Ver would learn that they had made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity, and Earth would show them in the most devastating way possible why humans were the last species standing. The first strike was only the beginning. The battle was far from over, and the humans would fight until the very end. The tide turns. The battle raged on for hours, a chaotic dance between humanity's ancient fleet and the might of the Fourth. The humans fought with a tenacity that the Four hadn't expected, and it was beginning to show. Despite their advanced weapons and superior numbers, the Ver fleet was starting to waver. General Hayes stood in the command center, her gaze fixed on the tactical display. The Excalibur had suffered heavy damage, but it was still operational. Her fleet had taken losses too, but they were still standing still, fighting. The battle had become a test of endurance, and humanity was proving it could endure. Report, Hay barked, her voice calm but urgent. Multiple enemy ships have been disabled. General, the tactical officer responded. We've inflicted significant damage to their flagship. However, we're still taking heavy fire. The VOR are adapting. They are regrouping. Hay nodded, her mind racing. The VOR had underestimated Earth's ability to fight back, but now they were adjusting their strategy. The humans had to stay one step ahead. Don't let up, she said, her voice sharp. We have them on the ropes. Keep pressing the attack on the Excalibur. Captain Roberts was coordinating his crew's efforts with military precision. The ship had taken another hit, but Roberts refused to let that slow them down. Target their engines, he ordered. Take out their ability to maneuver. The crew responded immediately, and the Excalibur's weapons fired again, this time targeting the vulnerable engines of a 43 destroyer. The missiles hit their mark, and the destroyer was rocked by a massive explosion. It spun out of control, its systems failing one by one. The VOR flagship retaliated with its main weapon, a massive energy being that sliced through the space between them. But the Excalibur had already moved. It was a hit and run tactic. One, the Ver weren't prepared for. You can run, but you can't hide, Roberts muttered under his breath. He wasn't going to let the VOR get away with this. Meanwhile, aboard another ship in the fleet, Lieutenant Carter was watching the battle unfold with wide eyes. He was just a rookie, but today he was part of something that was changing the course of history. His fingers trembled slightly as he gripped the control panel. He had never imagined he would be part of something this big, this dangerous. But the fight was personal now. The Ver weren't just invaders, they were a threat to everything Carter held dear. He wasn't going to back down. Enemy reinforcements incoming, the comms officer reported. We're not alone anymore. It was true. As the battle raged on, more and more Veether ships arrived, adding to the overwhelming odds. The humans had been fighting for hours, and their resources were beginning to dwindle. They couldn't keep up this pace. Forever, all ships conserve ammunition. General Hayes ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. We're going to make every shot count. Hayes knew the humans were on the edge. If they couldn't turn the tide now, they might not have another chance. But there was a glimmer of hope. The Ver were losing control of their formation. The human fleet's unpredictability, the use of outdated but clever tactics, was causing confusion among the Four commanders. They had expected the humans to fold under pressure, but the exact opposite was happening. We're not done yet, Hay whispered to herself. She knew the 43 wouldn't give up easily, but neither would she. The humans had one more trick up their sleeve, and it was time to unleash it. Back on the Excalibur, Roberts issued the final command. All ships prepare to execute the last phase of the plan. The VOR had no idea what was coming. The humans had made a simple but crucial decision. They would fight not just with their weapons, but with their ingenuity. As the human fleet began to maneuver into position, something strange began to happen. The Veether, already stretched thin, began to lose their focus. The human ships, old, slow, and seemingly outlast, moved in unpredictable ways. Their movements were erratic, almost as if they were purposefully baiting the VOR into making mistakes. Then the humans made their move. A barrage of missiles erupted from Earth's ships, not aimed at the Veether ships themselves, but at the surrounding asteroid belt. The massive chunks of rock and debris were turned into weapons as they hurtled toward the Ver fleet. It was an unconventional, desperate measure, but it was a stroke of brilliance. The Vori were forced to divert their firepower not at the humans, but at the incoming asteroids and debris. The maneuver created chaos in the Vida ranks, forcing them to react rather than attack for the first time. Since the battle began, the Ver were on the defensive. The humans were pushing them into a corner. "Yes, that's it," Carter exclaimed, as he watched a massive asteroid strike a Vori warship. "Disabling it, we've got them." But the victory was far from secured. The Ver were still formidable opponents, and they would adapt. This was only a momentary shift in the balance of power. The battle was far from over, but the humans were beginning to turn the tide. General Hayes watched the battle unfold from the command center. A feeling of cautious optimism beginning to build. Earth's fleet had taken a beating, but they hadn't given up. The VOR had made the mistake of underestimating humanity. They thought they could crush Earth's defenses with ease, but instead, they had awakened a sleeping giant. "Prepare for Phase 2, Hay," said her voice steady. "We fight until the last ship is standing." Across the battlefield, Earth's fleet moved as one, determined to prove that no one could conquer humanity. "Not today, not ever." The final message from Earth was clear. "Since you chose war, prepare for the consequences." The unexpected counterattack, as the battle raged on, Earth's fleet had already inflicted significant damage on the Vorar. But they were far from finished. The tide of war had shifted slightly in the human favor, but the enemy's response was swift and brutal. The Vida were no strangers to defeat, but they had always bounced back with an even fiercer resolve. They had underestimated humanity's resourcefulness once, and they weren't about to make that mistake again. General Hayes watched the battlefield from her command center, her face drawn in concentration. "Report." She commanded, her voice low but commanding. "Multiple enemy ships are regrouping." The tactical officer responded, pointing at the tactical screen. "They're about to launch a counterattack." The Vida had regrouped quickly, using their advanced technology to bring reinforcements to bear. Their ships, sleek and menacing, appeared as a new wave of dark ships against the backdrop of stars. And they were closing in on Earth's fleet at an alarming speed. Earth's ships were still scattered and vulnerable after the debris barrage, and the humans couldn't afford to lose momentum. "We need to pull back and reassess," Hay said, her mind racing with strategy. "Get all ships to form a defensive perimeter. We can't afford to be caught off guard again." On board the Excalibur, Captain Roberts was already anticipating the worst. His ship was in better shape than most, but the damage it had sustained during a previous engagement was starting to take its toll. The Excalibur was slow to maneuver, but it was far from useless, sir. The comms officer called. "The enemy fleet is closing in. They're deploying an energy weapon." Roberts gritted his teeth. The Vor's energy weapons were unlike anything the humans had faced before, devastatingly powerful, capable of slicing through hulls with ease. The last thing they needed was a direct hit. "Prepare the shields. We need to anticipate their moves," Roberts said, his voice steady. "But tense will use their aggression against them. They are going to try to break through our line. Let's make sure they pay for it." The order was given, and the crew of the Excalibur scrambled to prepare for the incoming onslaught. As the VOR fleet closed in, their ships fired first beams of pure energy lit up the space between the two fleets as the Vida ships unleashed their weapons. But humanity had learned from its earlier mistakes. As the beams of energy neared Earth's fleet, the ships moved in a well-coordinated, evasive maneuver. It was a risky move, and it required perfect timing. But humanity had one advantage that the VOR lacked: unpredictability. The human fleet was not bound by rigid tactics and protocols. They fought with raw instinct, adapting in the heat of battle. Roberts watched as the energy beams grazed past the Excalibur, missing by Mir, and the crew let out a collective breath of relief. "That's it," Roberts exclaimed. "Now hit the M. Show them what we've got." In a coordinated attack, the Excalibur and the other human ships turned to face the VY fleet. They fired a barrage of missiles and energy blasts that hit the VY ships with precision. The VY ships staggered under the assault, but they fought back immediately, firing energy pulses in retaliation. "Captain, they targeting the Excalibur," the comms officer warned. Roberts' expression hardened. The Ver weren't just responding, they were desperate. The human fleet had done something unexpected, something that rattled the Vor's usually unshakable confidence. They were no longer just facing an enemy, they were facing the human force that was more dangerous than they could have imagined. "We need to disable their main energy weapon," Roberts said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't survive another blast from that thing." The tactical officer nodded. "Working on it, sir. The Vida flagship is within range, locking on to their weapon systems." Roberts waited watching the tactical display. The VOR flagship loomed large in the distance, a dark titan in the void of space. Its energy weapon was its most formidable asset, but it also made the flagship a prime target. The human fleet had one chance to disable it before the fourth, to launch their next devastating attack. Fire! Roberts ordered. Missiles streaked through space, their warheads designed to infiltrate the enemy's heavily armored ships. The missiles made impact with the VOR flagship, and a blinding explosion lit up the darkness. For a moment, everything seemed still. Then the flagship's energy weapon powered down. The VOR flagship had been neutralized. Yes, Roberts shouted, unable to hide his excitement. We've got them. The Veether fleet was in disarray. Their main weapon had been silenced, and the human ships moved in for the final push. The VOR commander scrambled to recover, but it was clear that their initial advantage was slipping away. The humans had forced them into a position where their superior firepower no longer mattered in the heat of battle. A glimmer of hope appeared on Earth's side. General Hayes watched as the human fleet regrouped, firing relentlessly at the now disoriented VOR ships. The tide of the battle was turning in favor of Earth, but the war was far from over. The VOR were still dangerous, still determined. But the humans had made a statement. They would never back down. The final message was still clear in their minds. Since you chose war, prepare, care for the consequences. And they were just getting started. The battle intensifies. The VOR had suffered significant losses, their flagship neutralized, and their once formidable fleet scattered and disoriented. But their response came quickly, brutal, and with a cold fury that only a wounded enemy could muster. They were no strangers to defeat, but they would not let this moment of weakness taunt them. They were determined to crush the humans who dared to defy them. General Hayes watched the holographic battlefield in her command center. Her eyes narrowed, and thought Earth's forces had gained an advantage. But it was a fragile one. The Veether, though shaken, were regrouping, bringing every ounce of their advanced technology and military prowess to bear. Their fleet was still powerful, and they would strike with everything they had to push the humans back. Prepare the fleet for another wave. General Hayes ordered, her voice calm, but tanged with urgency of the moment. We've made our move now. They will make theirs on board the Excalibur. Captain Roberts gripped the command chair tightly, his knuckles white. The battle had been fierce, and his ship had sustained damage, but it was still operational, and they had an important role to play. The Excalibur had been part of the spearhead that struck the 4th's main weapon, but now they had to defend their ground. Captain, the VOR are forming a new formation. The tactical officer reported, his eyes scanning the red outs. It looks like they're going for a full offensive. Roberts leaned forward, studying the tactical screen. The VOR were unpredictable, and their new formation seemed designed to overwhelm the humans in a final push. It was a bold move, and Roberts knew the next few minutes would decide everything. The enemy would either break, or they would come for Earth with everything they had. Shields up, all weapons at full power. Roberts ordered, his voice steady despite the growing tension. We're not giving them an inch. The Excalibur and the rest of Earth's fleet tightened their formation, preparing for the inevitable onslaught. Roberts could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The humans had already sent a message. They would not go down without a fight. But now, the VOR were preparing to return that message in the most violent way possible. As the enemy fleet charged forward, the first wave of VOR warships opened fire, their energy beams slicing through the dark void of space. Earth ships responded in kind, returning fire with their own weapons. The battlefield lit up with flashes of light as energy blasts collided, sending shock waves across the stars. We've lost contact with the outer perimeter ships. The communications officer shouted. The VOR are breaking through. Roberts felt his stomach churn. They had expected this. The Veether had been known for their ability to exploit weaknesses in enemy formations, and now they were doing exactly that. The outer ships were falling, and the VOR were pushing toward the heart of the fleet. General Hayes, Roberts said over the comms, we can't hold them back much longer. We need reinforcements, or we'll lose the battle. I'm sending everything I can. Hayes responded, her voice tight with stress. But we need to hold them off for just a little longer. Earth cannot afford to lose this fight. Roberts knew what that meant. The fate of humanity, the very survival of Earth, rested on their ability to withstand the VOR assault. If they failed now, there would be no second chance. The Veether would finish what they had started and annihilate humanity. The Excalibur fired its remaining energy weapons at the VOR warships, but it was clear they were vastly outnumbered. More VOR ships appeared on the tactical display, encircling the humans, and cutting off any escape routes. The battle was becoming a desperate fight for survival, Captain. We've got incoming, the sensors officer shouted. Dreadnoughts on all sides, Roberts cursed under his breath. The Veether had brought out their heaviest weapons, their dreadnoughts, massive ships with unparalleled firepower. The Excalibur was no match for them in a head-to-head fight. But it wasn't just about firepower anymore, it was about strategy. And Roberts knew the humans had something the Vori didn't. Ingenuity will have to outsmart them. Roberts said, his voice calm despite the mountain chaos. All ships follow my lead, prepare for evasive maneuvers. The crew of the Excalibur sprang into action. The ship turned on a dime, dodging the incoming fire. As Roberts led the way, the human fleet scattered, breaking their formation. To confuse the Ver, the dreadnought's heavy weaponry couldn't adjust fast enough to hit multiple targets. Earth's ships used their agility to their advantage, weaving through the fire and continuing to retaliate. The battle had turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Vor's heavy ships were slower, their massive guns powerful, but cumbersome. The humans, smaller and faster, were dancing around them, launching quick strikes and darting away before the Ver could react. But as the fight dragged on, Roberts could see the toll it was taking on his crew. The Excalibur was barely holding together, and many of the other ships were in worse shape. The Vor were relentless, and their numbers were overwhelming. We can't keep this up forever, the tactical officer warned. We need something decisive. Roberts glanced at the readout and made a snap decision. There was one final card to play, one final gamble that could turn the tide of battle. Prepare the Excalibur experimental weapon. He ordered. It's time to show the 4-3 what humanity is really capable of. The experimental weapon, a last-ditch attempt to turn the tide of war, was humanity's secret weapon, a weapon that could deliver a blow that the 5th would never see coming. It was a risky move, but in the current situation, it was the only option. As the crew worked feverishly to power up the weapon, Roberts took one last look at the battlefield. The Ver were closing in fast. The stakes had never been higher. It was now or never. Ready, the weapons officer said. Fire, Roberts shouted. A brilliant flash of light erupted from the Excalibur, the experiment weapon launching a beam of concentrated energy that pierced through the Vor dreadnoughts like a hot knife through butter. The shockwave was enough to shake the entire battlefield. The tide of battle had shifted once again. For the first time, the VORTH were on the defensive. The final showdown, the entire battlefield seemed to hold its breath as the effects of the Excalibur's experimental weapon rippled through space. The blinding flash of light began to fade, leaving behind a scared and broken landscape of shattered ships and disintegrated debris. The Vor dreadnoughts that had once seemed so invincible were now burning husks, their advanced technology failing under the overwhelming force of humanity's final weapon. General Hayes, standing at the heart of Earth's command center, watched the holographic display with mixed emotions. The Ver were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. But their retreat didn't come easily. The remnants of their fleet, though battered and disoriented, still had the capacity to strike back with devastating power. Hold your positions, Hayes commanded. We've won the first round, but the fight isn't over yet. On the Excalibur, Captain Roberts stared at the tactical display, his breath coming in short gasps. The experimental weapon had bought them time. But the Ver were still a formidable enemy. They would regroup, they would adapt, and they would come for Earth again, stronger than ever. The Excalibur was damaged, its systems barely functioning after the strain of firing the experimental weapon. But the crew was still alive. They still had a chance. Captain, the Vor are retreating, the sensors officer reported, his voice filled with disbelief. It looks like they're trying to regroup for another assault. Roberts let out a breath. He hadn't realized was holding. The Ver were retreating, but not without one final act of defiance. As their ships limped away from the battlefield, they unleashed one last devastating wave of energy weapons targeting Earth's most vulnerable ships. We've got incoming, the tactical officer shouted. They're coming in for the final strike. Roberts' mind raced. This was it. The Ver were pulling out all the stops. If Earth's fleet didn't make it out of this alive, the consequences would be dire. Full evasive maneuvers, Roberts barked. No one gets left behind. The Excalibur veered hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a blast from a Ver cruiser. The rest of Earth's fleet followed suit, dodging incoming fire. But the Ver weren't going to give up that easily. They had one last chance to take Earth down. The final showdown was nothing short of chaotic. Ships darted and weaved through the barrage of fire. Every move A desperate attempt to stay alive, the Vorar were relentless. But humanity had something they hadn't counted on: unbreakable determination. "We need to hit them now, or we'll lose everything," the weapons officer shouted. "All ships prepare to fire." On my mark, the Vorar dreadnoughts were closing in their weapons, charging for one final strike that could end everything. The humanity's forces didn't have much time left. Roberts knew that the VORTH would strike in a matter of moments. And if they didn't act quickly, Earth's fleet would be no more. "We have to make this count," Roberts said, his voice low but steady. "Fire everything we've got." As soon as the order was given, the Excalibur fired its remaining weapons in a final desperate attempt to push back the enemy. The blast struck the 4th dreadnought head-on, causing an explosion so powerful that it rippled through space itself. Ships were torn apart in the wake of the explosion, and for a moment it felt like the universe itself had been rocked by the power of humanity's resilience. But the Ver weren't done. Their remaining ships fired again, this time in a coordinated strike, aimed directly at Earth's heart, its fleet. "And its home world, Captain. We got one more shot," the tactical officer said, urgency in his voice. "We need to break through the last wave." Roberts gritted his teeth. This was the final test. The Vether had pushed humanity to its limits, but they hadn't counted on human ingenuity and the spirit of resistance that burned within every person on Earth. "We won't let them win," Roberts muttered. "Do it in a last-stage effort." Earth's fleet combined all their firepower into one concentrated ship shot. The blast, a fusion of every weapon available, pierced the Vor's final line of defense, obliterating their ships in a burst of light and energy that seemed to stretch across the galaxy. The Vor fleet was destroyed. Silence followed. It was an eerie, oppressive silence. For a moment, no one on Earth's side could speak. They had done it against all odds. They had defeated the Ferrari. The enemy, once so confident in their superiority, had been humbled by humanity's strength, creativity, and tenacity. The war was over. General Hayes allowed herself a small sigh of relief, but the victory felt bittersweet. The cost had been high, and the battle had left deep scars on both sides. Earth's people had won. But at what cost? "We've done it," Hayes whispered to herself. But this is only the beginning. The final message had been delivered not through words, but through the actions of a species that refused to be conquered. The Vether had chosen war, and now they knew exactly what it meant to face the full force of humanity's resolve. And though Earth had emerged victorious, the universe had been irrevocably changed. The humans had sent a message that would echo through the stars for generations to come. Earth was no longer a planet to be underestimated. Human had proven that when pushed to the brink, they would always fight back. And in doing so, they had ensured their place in the galaxy, not as a species to be ignored or conquered, but as one to be reckoned with.